Hello lovely people, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kat and I make videos about books, writing and other random things living rent-free in my neurodivergent brain. Today I have a very exciting announcement. I am launching Neurovember, which is my first monthly readathon or bingo challenge, and I really hope that you're going to join me for it. There are already a lot of reading challenges on BookTube, so I'm sure you're familiar with the idea, but the overall plan is to read together around a theme, the theme of Neurovember. And so the whole idea is that from the 1st of November to the 30th of November, we would read a bunch of books about the mind, how the brain works, how minds work, how we think, with a specific focus around neurodiversity, because it's a topic that's very dear to my heart and I want to raise awareness about it, and I want to educate myself more about it and hopefully encourage other people to do so as well. But I wanted this readathon to be a bit broader than that, and so on top of this focus around neurodiversity, other topics that I covered by Neurovember are mental health, critical thinking, psychology, neurosciences, if that's your thing, everything that revolves around, again, the brain and the mind and how those work. This challenge is gonna take the form of a bingo board, which you will see here on the screen with a number of prompts. And so because it's only 1 month long, I don't expect a lot of people to complete the whole board. You can just focus on one column, one row, or a diagonal, and that will be enough to win the challenge. There are few rules to go with this bingo board, and they were designed to both encourage you to educate yourself more about neurodivergence, but also to make the challenge and the readathon as accessible as possible. So the first rule is that you need to read about at least 2 forms of neurodivergence. So that could be autism, ADHD, high intellectual potential, OCD, synesthesia, dyslexia, other forms of learning difficulties, and all that kind of spectrum that is neurodiversity. Again, because I want this to be as inclusive as possible, if you have a doubt about whether something constitutes neurodivergence, then err on the side of inclusion and consider that it would count for this challenge. The second rule is that you need to read at least 1 fiction and 1 non-fiction book. And then the third rule is that you can use the same book for different prompts on the board. So because you need to read 1 fiction, 1 non-fiction, but you could use the same book several times to complete a row, a column, or a diagonal, it means that to complete the challenge, if you choose your book in a strategic way, you could win with only 2 books read this month for Neurovember. I hope that makes sense, but I will have all the information compiled in a Google Doc that I will link in the description below. Now moving on to the prompts from the bingo board. Starting with the top row, the first prompt is biography or memoir. So it's pretty self-explanatory, it's a genre prompt, and you could decide to read a memoir from someone with autism or ADHD, or you could read a biography about a psychologist or a neuroscientist, someone working in the field around the mind, for example. The next prompt is a fun read, and that's very open. It depends on what that means for you. So it can be fun because of the topic, because of the format, because of the approach that the author took. It could also be a book by a comedian, and in the document with all the information for Neurovember, I've included some reading suggestions and recommendations, so you will find books for all of those prompts. The next prompt is mental health. So again, it can be a fiction or a non-fiction book as long as it touches on the topic of mental health. Next is other species. And so the idea here is to read a book that explores the mind and the way of thinking of other species. So most likely non-human animals, but who knows, maybe you will find something even more original than that. And the last prompt for this row is bodies. And so the idea here is to bring the mind and the body back together because they can't function without each other. And so it could be a fiction with a character that is both neurodivergent and disabled, for example, or it could be a non-fiction book exploring the intersection of those two things. Anyway, it needs to be a book that explores kind of the connection between the mind and the body. Again, there will be recommendations in the Google Doc. Moving on to the second row, the first prompt is published in 2024, pretty self-explanatory. The second prompt is BIPOC representation, so you would want to find a book related to the topics of Neurovember, so critical thinking, neurodivergence, mental health, all of that good stuff, but at the intersection with Black, Indigenous, and people of color representation. So it could be a book on the Neurovember topics written by an author of color, or it could be a fiction book including some characters having that representation as well. Next is sensitivity, which is all about exploring the senses, and that's often something that is quite particular for people who are neurodivergent. So for the purpose of this challenge, it could be something like changing the format of the book you're reading, so listening to an audiobook, for example, to stimulate your hearing. It could also be reading a graphic novel or things like that. Next is a book with a main character who is neurodivergent, and for this one, memoirs and biography count, so you could accumulate prompts with the first one. And next is a book with neuro in the title. Again, there will be suggestions in the Google Doc. Moving on to the third row, the first prompt is other location. And so for this one, you could either decide to read one of the books you've selected for the challenge in another location. So maybe another spot in your house where you not usually go to read, or maybe in a new cafe in town or something like that. Or you could pick a book that is set or from another country than your own. The next prompt is neurodivergence representation. And so the idea with this one is that often when we talk about neurodiversity and neurodivergence, the first thing that comes into mind is autism and ADHD. And those are usually the two that are also most represented, that you will find books about more easily. So I wanted to kind of expand the horizon and encourage people to read about other forms of neurodivergence as well. And so this is what this prompt is about. Now, making it to the middle of the bingo board, you have a free space. So you can pick any book of your choosing related to the topics of Neurovember. Again, that's critical thinking, neurodivergence, mental health, psychology, neurosciences, all of that good stuff. Next, we have neurospice. And so this is for another genre prompt, which will be a romance book. And then finally for this row, critical thinking. So again, this is a topical prompt. And so you need to find a book that touches on the topic of critical thinking. For the fourth row, the first prompt is a neurodivergent author. So again, quite self-explanatory. You need to find a book that's been written by an author who is neurodivergent, and there are many of them. I've put a list in the Google Doc, but there are many, many, many more. And it's kind of an easy one to overlap with other prompts as well. So I think that one should be fairly easy for this challenge. Next, just read a short book that is under 250 pages. Forever Young. So this is for a book that is designed for a younger audience, so either a middle grade or a YA. And again, you will find recommendations and suggestions in the Google Doc. In translation, another pretty self-explanatory. For this one, you need to find a book that's been translated from another language. And finally, for the fourth row, you need to find a book with a brain on the cover. And then finally, the fifth row. So the first prompt is fantasy or science fiction. So that's another genre prompt. Next, we have other media. So for this one, you're actually not going to be reading a book, but you could be watching a movie or a documentary, looking into a YouTube channel, listening to a podcast. So it's basically exploring other formats and other resources about the mind, neurodivergence, and all of those Neurovember topics. Next is Out of Your Comfort Zone. So that's going to be a book that is a challenge for you. And that can be, again, depending on what it means to you. It can be because of the topic that it covers. It can be because it's a long book or anything of that realm. But yeah, it has to be a book that kind of pushes you a little bit to your limits and challenges you and makes you want to expand yourself. Next, another kind of a gift of a prompt. This is For Real, which is basically just a non-fiction prompt. And since you need to read one anyway to complete the challenge, again, it feels like a bit of a gift. And then finally, LGBTQIA+ representation. So as with another prompt in this bingo board, you want to find some intersection between the topics of Neurovember while also including queer representation in your reading. I had a lot of fun putting this bingo board together and I'm very excited about this readathon. I really hope that you're going to join me and that you will have as much fun in doing the challenge as I did preparing it. Again, I tried to make it as inclusive as possible and to design it in a way that you can make it as easy or as challenging as you want. So again, the minimum that you need to read for this challenge is 2 books, and you can use the same book for a number of prompts. I purposefully chose a number of prompts that could easily overlap so that, again, you can make things easier for yourself if you want to. If you have any questions, the information will be in the description below. I really hope that you will join me for Neurovember. Again, we're starting on November 1st, so you have a little bit of time to start finding the books that you want to read for the challenge. And again, you can overlap things and make them as easy or challenging as you want. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one, and especially during the month of November. Happy reading! Bye bye!